thought I'd start with a bit of nostalgia for some of you anyway. And some of you will be wondering what it's all about. I'll probably sit down more than stand up. I'll find that easier. But when Tim, Tricia and I were discussing what we were going to do and how to present it, at least as far as that little poster was concerned, we wondered what flower to put on there, and I think, of course, we came up with bluebells straight away. Very reminiscent, or very much part of Wanstead Park. But I thought, well, you know, bluebells, everybody knows the bluebells in Wanstead Park, so let's do a Scottish bluebell, a harebell, because they're just as much part of Wanstead Park, although many of you might not even realise they're there. Tricia mentioned the way that at some time the owners of the land actually encouraged what might be perceived as wildflowers rather than just grasslands, to give a little bit of colour. And in Wanstead Park right now, we've got harebells. You may not even notice them, but they're there. And once you get your eye in for them, they're a lovely colour amongst that green. Look at them a little bit more later. My interest in wildflowers sort of grew out of the usual way, really, out of an interest in bird watching. I don't think I'd have ever been called a twitcher. I liked looking at the local birds and trying to find out what they were and what was around here. But one day I was parked in a lay-by up by Loch Ness, and right by the side of the car was this little flower, not this particular one, this is a local one, but it was this species. And it's a very small thing, but it's a lovely little thing. I wondered what it was, so I drove into Inverness, bought myself a little tiny guidebook to wildflowers, drove back, found it again, and found out it was called Herb Robert. It's a geranium, a little geranium, Geranium robertianum. And there it was. I started looking at wildflowers. I was by no means the first, of course. And back in the 1940s, this lady, Gulielma Lister, who lived in Leytonstone, actually did a study of the flora of Wanstead Park district. And she looked at Wanstead Park, the area of the park lands, which had been the house, which is now partially the golf course. She looked at bushwood, and Tricia mentioned gardens being incorporated from the forest, and she looked at the WREN estate, the trees, and she recorded the plants that she found there. Now this was she read this in 1941, it was published. Flora of Wanstead Park district. In these days of swiftly changing conditions, well, Tricia said how much things have changed over the years. They're changing all the time. That's one of the wonders of nature. Not just climate change, we change things all of the time. And it was just coincidentally 40 years later when the WREN group decided to do a study of the wildlife of Wanstead Park, and it was intended to be a year's study of the wildlife. Well, we got started. Some people, I suppose most people, chose birds. I chose plants as a particular subject, as I'd got interested in them. And I very, very quickly realised that a year, no chance whatsoever. But I kept on looking first of all at Wanstead Park, then Wanstead Flats, then I went up to Bushwood, Leighton Flats, and up to Gilbert Slade, because the WREN group had a remit from the City of London Corporation to study the wildlife south of Waterworks Corner, southern Epping Forest. And I just kept going. Well, the chairman, I think, of the WREN group at that time, Colin Plant, looked at the work that I'd been doing and suggested that it be published. I'd never thought of having anything published at all, but nevertheless went through with that, and the Flora of Southern Epping Forest Part 1, Wanstead Park, was published in 1980. And that was followed by Flora of Wanstead Flats Part 2, Leighton Flats Part 3, Gilbert Slade Part 4, and quite a few years later I published, or I had published in the Essex Naturalist, just by way of the change, the Flora of the City of London Cemetery. The flora of the sewage works, actually, the old Redbridge Southern Sewage Works. The collection of data that I amassed in doing this amounted to something like 780 species of wildflowers in this area. 780 species. That doesn't include things like mosses and lichens. It's flowering plants, but it does include ferns. That's the area essentially that we cover. You've already seen it on the Google map that Tricia showed you. Here, I took this photograph myself, by the way. You may, I did. yes. From an aircraft flying over. We have Wanstead Flats with Alexandra Lake. Wanstead Park, that's the plain. There's Bushwood with the tower block there. And going right up there, almost in the shadow, is Leighton Flats over here and Gilbert Slade right up to somewhere like Waterworks Corner up there. But I started collecting records of other areas. Tricia mentioned the green corridors. And it's not just the park or parklands or wild areas that we may think of as having plants. It is people's gardens, roads. Certainly the City of London Cemetery is a wonderful place. Yes, of course, a lot of the plants there have been planted, and sometimes very difficult to know whether they are natural or naturalised. But the important thing is that they're lovely, and you can go out and it's just the fun of finding things. So that's our survey area from an aerial view. That's a little map that I drew out to cover it. Notice there's grid squares on there, and I'll come to that later. There's the harebell. There's the harebell that was shown on Tim's poster. It's a lovely little plant. Actually, I find it quite difficult to photograph, and one of the reasons is actually getting down there to do it. But I do find it difficult to photograph that one. This one is on the plain in Wanstead Park, as most of the ones that I know are. That's a ground level view of a little group of them. And that's how you see them. That's how you see them, if you can pick them out there. In amongst that grass, they're there. There's 3 or 4 little grass. I found another group of them just this year. They must have been there forever, so to speak. But I found another group. So 3 or 4 little groups of them. Well, we do have to include bluebells. Of course we do. And one of the reasons why we have to include them is because the WREN group has been, for many years now, doing so much work to actually enhance those bluebells that are now so popular, the ones in Chalet Wood. There are thousands and thousands of bluebells in Wanstead Park, and it isn't just in Chalet Wood, the wood near to the temple. There are so many more throughout the park. Very often it's very, very difficult to see them simply because of access, but they're there. And in Chalet Wood, the WREN group we were there just the other weekend, clearing up the litter, clearing up the camps that people put in there, so that in the spring people will come to see them. a few years ago we realised that people were coming to see them, and of course you can always find little wilted groups of them at the park gates. They don't last at all if they're picked, and it's such a shame that they are. But it's not just picking that damages those bluebells. I actually asked for this notice to be put up a few years ago, and actually wrote the notice out myself for the City of London to do so. I think it has worked, but the bluebells are almost a victim of their own popularity. People walking in amongst them to photograph them, trampling, laying down in them, which must be very lovely, but bluebells suffer so much from trampling. And actually, I think in the last year or two, they've been going a bit downhill, victims of their own popularity. So perhaps that's something that we will need to think about. How can we enhance them further? Including with their popularity, how can we protect them as well as allow people to appreciate them? Not a very good photograph, this, but they are wood anemones, and it's another little pleasure of Wanstead Park. Back in the late 70s, I found one tiny little patch of wood anemones at the bottom of the slope that leads down from the gate off of Warren Road, Flores Hill. A tiny little patch. But again, once we know that something is there, we can do things to protect them and allow them to spread. And they have. They've spread immensely by clearance work, protecting them, keeping people from, again, trampling these. They're a lovely little flower and come out just about the same time as the bluebells. Wood anemones, bluebells, harebells, they're very traditional. They've been in the country as natives, I believe. Well, certainly the English bluebells. We've got an invasive Spanish bluebell, which some of you may be aware of. But things change. Things change. And just a couple of years ago, year before last, I started noticing this plant around. I thought, there's something odd about it. It's ragwort. And possibly many of you are familiar with ragwort. We've actually got two very common types of ragwort in this area, common ragwort and Oxford ragwort. Oxford ragwort is a well-known alien that was introduced to the botanical gardens in Oxford from such places as the slopes of Etna, because it loves those dry slopes, and it spread along the railway lines, and now you find it all over the country. So common ragwort, which is the one that's rather dangerous to horses, and Oxford ragwort are long established here. And then this one. What's different about it? There was something different about it, and I don't know how easy it is for you to see the leaves, but the point is the leaves are not that prominent. They're much narrower than either of the other two species. That's what I noticed about them. So I started doing an internet search because it wasn't in any of my books. And it's got narrow leaves, so what's it going to be called? Yeah, it is. It's narrow-leaved ragwort. So that's a new one. That's a new one. It doesn't seem to be doing any harm. This one, by the way, comes from South Africa. So we've got a native one as the common ragwort. We've got one from the Mediterranean area. Now we've got one from South Africa. It doesn't seem to be doing any harm. Some things like the Spanish bluebells do. This doesn't. So let's see what happens with that. This is a strange little plant which was only discovered, I think, by one of the forest keepers actually a few years ago on the slopes of the temple in Wanstead Park. I'd overlooked it. Well, I'm sure it's been there for a long time. I certainly overlooked it, and when I was told about it and had a look, I thought, that's absolutely wonderful. It's tiny. There's a blade of grass there, which will give you an idea. Actually, I really think that must be a big blade of grass, because it is so tiny, this thing. I've searched it out numerous times. The flowers don't help much, but it's a little plant called bird's foot, and I only put it in there. It's not bird's foot trefoil, it's bird's foot. And I only put it in there as an example of the sort of things that are around that are so easily missed, you know, even by, you know, very experienced observers, not me. So that's bird's foot. And Wanstead Park has some other specialities. This is yellow loosestrife. Not a particularly rare plant throughout the country, but there's only a couple of places in Essex that this plant is known from. Cranham Marsh is one, and Wanstead Park is another. It's very common round the lakes in Wanstead Park, around the ornamental waters, and it's a lovely, lovely plant. Together with a somewhat similar plant, purple loosestrife. It's a lovely, lovely show. So that's yellow loosestrife. And it is a flowering plant. It's a sedge in this. I'm just trying to think of the scientific name. It's Carex nigra, and I just love those black flower heads on it. I think they're absolutely wonderful thing. It's common sedge. Not everything has a great flamboyant flower, but some of them are so beautiful in their simplicity. I quite like that. It's got a little... yeah. It's the flower of an elm. And again, we tend to overlook very often, unless it's with trees, unless it's something like a cherry, you know, which is a flowering cherry, we tend to overlook so many of the trees, the fact that trees have flowers at all. But isn't that an interesting little thing? And another flower of a tree. And this one you're much more likely to smell and see. If you walk through Wanstead Park, particularly at the reservoir wood end near the shoulder of Mutton Pond, you can actually you can smell it from much further away than that. It's balsam poplar. Balsam poplar, sometimes called balm of Gilead. And I just like that little cup holder on a yew. I'm sure it must have been used for that from time to time on special occasions, probably like the coming solstice, I don't know. That's one of the yews by the grotto. Moving over to Wanstead Flats, a lovely area. Again, it's so easy to just drive across or past Wanstead Flats and look at it and see an expanse of grassland. But there are something like 43 species of tree on Wanstead Flats. And it's all grass, isn't it? And we've got gorse and broom. We've lost some things, some lovely little things, since the cattle have stopped grazing, and one of them was a plant that looks very much like gorse, but it was tiny, petty whin, lovely plant, and it's gone. I've searched for it every year. The cattle are not grazing the plants and keeping the rough stuff down, so the petty whin has gone, unfortunately. And another plant that's well, easily overlooked unless it's in flower, and I'm lucky I've got a picture of it in flower there and there, and perhaps that will give some of you more of an idea of what it is. Have a look at that, and have a look at that. Well, that's a willow flower, isn't it? Is that what you think of as willow? That's creeping willow. Another one of Wanstead Flats' specialities. There are 5 or 6 patches of that, and they're threatened, some of them. they're threatened. Can you see how close the football pitches are to that? And each time they mow the football pitches, the mower sort of takes another inch closer and closer. We need to protect our specialities. We need to protect our plants. How about that? That's nothing, nothing particular, is it? Just a sort of rather straggly green shrub. On Wanstead Flats, you can see St Gabriel's Church in the background there. There you go, there's the flower. And there's the berry. It's a lovely plant. Do any of you know what it is? Well done, the Duke of Argyll's tea tree. What a name for a plant. Apparently, the Duke of Argyll, whoever, got it sent to him thinking it was tea, you know. But it weren't. How that got onto Wanstead Flats, out on the grassland, I don't know. I really don't know why that is there. There are plants on Wanstead Flats that I think are relics of the prefabs that were there, you know, wartime. This is nowhere near them, so I don't know. But, you know, when you see flowers like that on an otherwise straggly little... It's a glory, isn't it? Anybody? I couldn't even hear that. There was sort of one of rose bay, yeah, it's rose bay willow herb. It's such a wonderful plant. I suppose people tend to take photographs of it en masse because that's how it grows. And the other name for that is fireweed, because that's the plant that cropped up after the war, after all the war damage. It was on all the bomb sites, debris as we used to call them. That's what was there. It loves burnt areas. And again, Wanstead Flats. You have to get up early to see this one, because that's Jack go to bed at noon. Goat's beard. Yeah, goat's beard. Anybody? Good. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tricia. It's always as well in case I don't remember, isn't it? It's Alexander's. It's a Mediterranean plant which was probably introduced many hundreds of years ago as a food plant. It's very common on cliff tops on the coast. Always has been. It's one of the first green plants in the early part of the year.
The only green thing in my garden at the moment.
Well, yeah, well, that's indicative, isn't it? It's this is on Centre Road, running across Wanstead Flats, the road between Forest Gate and Wanstead, and it is spreading down that road. There's masses of it in Lake House Road, and it is now sort of spreading down towards Forest Gate. So watch it, Forest Gate. Alexander's is taking off. I have a great deal of difficulty with this one, trying to find this one, because I've got a certain amount of red-green colour blindness. So to pick those little flowers out amongst the green isn't easy, but once I get my eye in, it's a lovely little thing. You probably can't see the leaves. Well, you can see the leaves actually. Here they are. So much like grass anyway. So unless it's in flower, it's almost impossible to pick that one out. And that's grass vetchling. It's actually a member of the pea family, but the grass bit of it gives it away, and you can see why. But look at that. Isn't that lovely? That little tiny flower. So beautiful. Grass vetchling. And we looked at almost a random selection. Not quite random. I picked out some of the specialities. But for no particular reasons, from Wanstead Park and then Wanstead Flats. And this one, it does grow on Wanstead Flats. I don't think I've ever found it in Wanstead Park, but it grows in the Aldersbrook Exchange lands, what used to be the old sewage works site. and it's quite profuse in there, if you can find it. If you get it in flower and you don't suffer from that form of colour blindness, it's a lovely little thing. That was a late addition, and I didn't quite put it in properly, did I? So this little cowslip was one of many, talking about sort of areas of open land, and certainly the old sewage works site is now part of Epping Forest. But this was growing amongst many, many others on that little strip of grassland next to Leytonstone Station. There's a little strip of grassland. Actually, I'm not sure of the name of the road, but if you come off Leyton High Road and go past with Tesco's on your right, and follow down the road to the left towards Leytonstone, there's a little strip of grassland, and there was masses of this growing on a couple of years ago. And there's my friend, Roger Snook, who's a better photographer than I am, and you can see why. Interesting, a friend of ours actually went past in a taxi as we were taking that. I found out afterwards, and the taxi driver said to her, "What are those two blokes doing down there?" And she looked. She said, "Oh, I know them." Well, it's winter aconite. Now, if there's any way that, you know, I can encourage you to sort of go out and start looking for flowers, just enjoying them, that may well be one of the first that you see. I say maybe because there are so many in flower right at the moment. I think they're going to go on flowering throughout the year. But this is a harbinger of spring, isn't it? The winter aconite. It's one of the first. Well, back to the map of southern Epping Forest. And that, as I say, is the recording area that the WREN group chose. I've added little bits to it because I think it's all relevant. Manor Park Cemetery, got sewage works site in there. There's a lovely little area alongside the City of London here by the Alders Brook. I've included in my survey work roads, roadsides, churchyards. That is the recording map that I drew up for the purposes of the survey. This is a revised version, but that's the one that essentially went into the publications back in the late 70s and 80s. That's the one of Wanstead Flats, and you'll notice it's got a grid square. If any of you do take up recording wildflowers, it'd be very useful to actually make use of those, because it's so important to know where what we've got is. It really is important. One of my main points that I've tried to put over throughout the years I've been with the WREN group is, and how I started, how can you conserve anything? WREN conservation group, any conservation group, how can you conserve anything unless you know what you've got? So that's what I used typically now. I've still got more or less the first book I ever used. It's a very simple guide, the Wildflowers of Britain and Northern Europe. I like that. There are other more weighty ones, yeah, but who's going to carry one of those around? That's the reference book these days, Stace. Remember, it's not just flowering plants. Well, it's not just flowers. Grasses have flowers as well, and that's a lovely book for identifying grasses. It's actually very, very easy. But really, all you need is one field guide, notebook and a pen. Magnifying glass comes in useful. Binoculars, well, they're nice to have around your neck. and I use a camera a lot these days. I thought I'd put that. I actually said I wasn't sure whether I'd put this in or not, but you probably recognise the gentleman on the right, and now you'll recognise the person in the middle. The gentleman on the left is Roger Tabor, and this was at the AGM of the British Naturalist Association a few years ago, which was held at Forest School, just up there by Gilbert Slade. And Roger Tabor phoned me some months prior, and out of the blue, I'd known him years previously, vaguely through the WREN group, and asked me if I'd be prepared to accept a medal. For the work that I'd put in recording local wildlife. Now, the reason that Roger thought that was warranted is because one of the things that the British Naturalists Association wants to sort of bring to people's mind is that studying, recording wildlife is not necessarily an academic process. It's not going to a university and learning about biology and botany. I never did that. I worked from a little guidebook well, not even a guidebook, not even a field guide, by the side of Loch Ness, going through with that field guide to the wildflowers of Britain and Northern Europe in a very, very simple way, but amassed an enormous amount, I realised, and other people obviously realised, of information which is so valuable to any of us. I was going to say any conservationist, any conservation group. So what an honour that was, you know, starting from just an interest in birds and shaking hands with David Bellamy. What an honour. So there are a number of groups, well, there are any number of groups around which you can join, or you could join. You don't have to. There's the WREN group, of course. There's people with expertise in all manner of different animals and plants within the WREN group. There's the Essex Field Club, the Essex Wildlife Trust, the London Wildlife Trust. These are all groups, organisations which, if you want to follow the study of wildlife, not just plants, there are people there that can help you. But what I would suggest is just get out there and enjoy it, because that's the main thing. Just enjoy the sheer beauty and of the mass of things that we've got around us. So thank you very much.